There's so much to unpack here. Let's bring in Josh Rogin, Washington Post columnist who covers foreign policy for the newspaper. So there's so much to talk about here. We want to talk about Iran in just a moment, but let's first talk about the killing of this Hamas leader. Just explain to us at this point in time how much of a bold move this is, the fact that this strike took place in Lebanon, not just Lebanon, but Beirut more specifically. It was targeted. Also worth noting that Israel at this point still is not claiming responsibility though, Josh.
Right. Well, on its face, this attack can be considered a successful killing of a globally designated terrorist, a man who had the blood of innocents on his hands. And although the Israelis have not admitted perpetrating the attack, they haven't denied it either. And I think what we see is a wink and a nod, because, of course, they're the ones who have the most to benefit, and they're the ones who are engaging in a war with Hamas. But although the attack itself may have been a success, the repercussions may absolutely redound to the not to the benefit of the Israeli government or the Israeli strategic objectives. And what I mean is that this Hamas leader had been very involved in not only negotiating over a potential day after plan with the Palestinian Authority on who would rule Gaza, but also in interacting with Hezbollah and Iran. And now that he's removed, I think the risk of an escalation with Hezbollah and the risk of an escalation on Israel's northern border have greatly increased. And so although the Israelis don't want to have an all-out war with Hezbollah, they don't want to have a second front, this attack may actually have the effect that they were exactly trying to avoid.
I mean, it's interesting because Mark Regev, just in a TV interview, essentially said, listen, obviously Israel not claiming responsibility, but he did say that this was not an attack on the Lebanese people. This was not an attack on Hezbollah, but rather a specific targeted strike on a Hamas leader. Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, is speaking now. He mentioned the killing of this Hamas leader, but he didn't call for any kind of escalation. He is usually quite cautious. I mean, what do you make of what he said so far?
Right. No, I think it's been clear for the last 2 months that Nasrallah and Hezbollah have been resisting the urging of Hamas to get more deeply involved in the war against Israel. And I think that resistance is part of an overall strategy amongst Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other Iranian proxies, especially in Iraq, to harass and intimidate U.S. and Israeli forces in the region without sparking the all-out war that nobody wants. And that's a very tricky calculation that Israel has now dropped a bomb in the middle of. In other words, all sides are trying to provoke without going over some imaginary line of deterrence that's in their head. And Israel has now scrambled all of those calculations. So I think Nasrallah and Hezbollah will take a beat and think about what happens next, especially considering what happened inside Iran today.
Just explain to our audience who might not necessarily be familiar with al-Aruri why he is such an important figure. I mean, this man, aside from being, part of the political wing for Hamas and a founding member of its military wing, he essentially was the sort of go-between, the liaison between Hamas and Hezbollah, almost like a Hamas ambassador for Hezbollah. Just explain to us why he's such an important figure.
Right. Over the course of his career, he's been something of a terrorist diplomat, if you can call him that. And his job was to encourage Iran and Hezbollah to become more involved in the Gazans' cause. And he had mixed success in that. But now that he's gone, someone else will have to do that job. And, make no mistake, Hamas will have a steady stream of terrorist leaders to fill the place of the ones that get killed. And that's the problem with these targeted attacks, is that they'll always find another guy to take that terrorist leader's place. But in the best case scenario, it slows down Hamas's effort to coordinate a wider regional war. But in the worst case scenario, it forces Hezbollah and Iran into a position where they feel they have to retaliate and actually escalate, which is exactly against not only Israeli interests, but also puts thousands of U.S. troops at greater risk in the region.
Let's talk about Iran now, because there were those twin attacks that took place near the burial site, near the tomb of General Soleimani, who was killed in a US airstrike 4 years ago. Today, I mean, the timing is significant, but again, we don't want to speculate in terms of who might be responsible. There's been no claims of responsibility so far. However, Iran hasn't waited to investigate before pointing the finger at Israel. What are the risks in the next 48 to 72 hours, just in terms of more escalation?
Right. We don't know who perpetrated the attack, but there's only really two choices, an internal force or an external force. And of course, the Iranian government doesn't want to think that it's an internal force, even though this pattern does fit, this attack does loosely match a pattern of Sunni militant attacks on Shia institutions. We can't rule out that it was something else. But of course, the Iranian government is going to point the finger at Israel. So what does that mean? It means that they're going to have to retaliate somehow. And they're going to retaliate against Israel, whether Israel did it or not. And considering what we just went through in terms of the tensions in Gaza, the tensions on Israel's northern border, the tensions in the Red Sea, this adds one more match to an already very, very brittle tinderbox. And, I think the Iranians don't want all-out war either, but in that sort of risk of how far can you retaliate without the re-retaliation spilling into a re-retaliation, somewhere in that calculation lies a risk of the all-out regional war that nobody really seeks.
I mean, yeah, when you think about what has happened in the last, 1 to 2 weeks. I mean, obviously yesterday we got the news of the Hamas leader that was killed in a drone strike in Beirut. Lebanon's capital. I mean, that is a really sort of bold move, even though it was targeted, as Mark Regev pointed out. But you've also got these Iran twin attacks happening when you think about the timing on General Soleimani's anniversary, the anniversary of his death. And you also have the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, which the US also retaliated against as well in terms of them taking out 3 boats. Just give us the sort of overall risk here when you think about the different facets that could lead to a much broader escalation.
Right. From the view of the Biden White House, this is the most dangerous and sensitive time that they've ever faced while in office. And their main goal is to respond proportionately, but without triggering the retaliation that would really just set the whole region on fire. And they're getting criticism, frankly, domestically for not responding to these attacks, especially in the Red Sea, forcefully enough. But they have a big responsibility here, which is to try to manage all sides of this conflict, which in the end can only be done through diplomacy. And that's the bottom line, is that the absence of a real diplomatic effort that involves the United States in an earnest way will prevent the Biden administration from having the leverage they need to de-escalate. So now everyone's just holding on tight and buckling their seatbelts and hoping the worst doesn't happen. But hope is not a strategy.
Yeah, diplomacy is, as you point out. There really is only one way out of that, and that is through the diplomatic channels. Josh Rogin, live for us there. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, still to come.